Hey everyone, welcome back to another installment of Where Do We Go From Here? It's Imran Khan, and I'm really excited to have a couple of friends from my New York past joining us today to talk a little bit about real estate. So today I have Scott Hernandez, who spent, I think, a decade on Wall Street before he switched to working over in real estate, and I'll let him introduce himself in just a second. And Matt Martin, who is someone who I worked with way back in the day under the Time Warner umbrella when he was at HBO, and then he moved on to Disney, and he spent, I think, what was it, like 10, 15 years working in accounting. Yeah. So both folks who worked on the finance side before moving over into real estate. So I'll shoot it over to Scott to do a quick little intro, and then we'll hear a little bit from Matt. Hey, Scott.
Hey, how's it going? Thank you so much. So I'm Scott Hernandez. I am a real estate agent in New York City. I work in all 5 boroughs. I'm on the Steve Gold team at the Corcoran Group. And yeah, I spent 10 years before doing real estate. I spent 10 years on Wall Street at the same firm. So, and it's just a breath of fresh air to be in real estate, even right now.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. And Matt, do you want to take a couple of seconds to introduce yourself?
Of course. First, thanks for having me. Happy to be here. My name is Matt Martin, and as Emmy was saying, I spent about 12 years in finance before this. I was at HBO. I was director of finance at Disney on Broadway. I got into real estate about 3.5 years ago. Like Scott, I work all around New York City. I'm with Halstead, soon to be Brown Harris Stevens, which is very weird to say. And and I'm excited to be here and talk about sort of this big question mark right now that we're all wondering about.
Well, thank you guys both for joining me. You know, it's actually one of the things that I found most interesting about when everything started to go really crazy and get locked down and whatnot. I actually had a couple of friends who were in the midst of buying apartments, and I started to think, well, what must be going on in the real estate world, right? Like, this has really fundamentally changed the game. And so I'd be really curious to hear from both of you, what has been the impact on real estate? Like, who's buying? What's the market like? Would love to get your guys' perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. So Matt, you want to start?
Sure. We didn't rehearse clearly, so good thing we're all old friends so we can bounce off each other.
Sure.
So what the impact has been is really a big question mark right now. There's a lot of news stories out there of, you know, moving companies are saying that their percentages are up 80% and everyone's leaving the city and this, that, or the other. And I think we really need to kind of wait to separate fact from fiction, because we don't really know how many of those moves are temporary, how many are people who are just riding out the pandemic somewhere else, how many of them are people who are actually leaving. So before we have this major freak out, I think we need to wait for the city to open back up, and especially phase 2, which hopefully is coming in the next week or two, which is going to allow us to start showing properties again. And I think once that happens, we're really going to understand who's out there, who's looking. But what we're seeing right now, at least the way that the data is leading me to believe, because real estate agents technically are not allowed to show properties in person right now. So really the only way to see a property is via video right now. No real primary residence buyer is going to buy a property for themselves, throw down all that money if they're only seeing it on a video. There's so many things you miss on a video. You don't see the building itself. You don't get that feel. So much of this business, especially when you're on the primary buyer side versus investor side, is the feel. How do you feel when you walk into a place? What's the light like? What's the vibe? What's the energy? All that kind of stuff that you just can't get from a video. So deals are actually happening though still. I think, what we're seeing obviously is people who entered contract before this all happened who are now finally closing. So you're seeing a lot of those. But in terms of new contracts, what we're seeing is a lot of investors. I get this report every week, the Olshan report it's called. It's all the 4 million and above transactions that have happened in the city. And I just read it this morning, and for the first time, we had actually a decent number of transactions that happened, a decent number of contracts signed. The highest one, I believe, was around $30 million. And they failed to disclose who the buyer was or anything about him, but it was a foreign buyer who had never seen the property in person, only via video. There's no way that's a primary residence buyer. So I think it's a time right now for investors that are really comfortable just buying something. They think they can get a good discount, and that's probably true. On average, I'm like just rambling. Scott, jump in at any point. But on average,
no, you're doing well.
A 7 to 10% reduction in asking price or an accepted price versus asking price. So if an investor can get in with a good price, they don't really need to walk into the property, which is pretty nice. I'm going to leave it right there so Scott can take it over.
And I absolutely agree with Matt and everything he said. While video and virtual tours are happening and it's going to be the wave of the future, I think that when we bring a listing to market, we're going to be like, okay, do we have the photos? Do we have the floor plans? Do we have the video, right? But that's just the first step. That's just going to be just an additional tool to get people to see listings. Not many people are going to buy without seeing a property. We see it often happen in new development where, people purchase off floor plans, right? They've never been in the building. It happened a lot back in the day, but now we have technology where even if the building isn't built, they have drones that go up and you can see what the view will be like from where your apartment will be, right? But if the apartment's existing, no one's going to buy it off virtual tour or off a video. They're just going to want to be in the space and feel the space, right? A lot of times, we have buyers that are emotional buyers, and they buy emotionally, and you need, in order to get that emotion, you need to be in the space. You can't just be like, oh, I that's a great video, I want to buy it, right? So it's true. So while I see all this heading into virtual, video and all that, I don't see transactions happening unless it's an investor like Matt said.
Absolutely.
Actually, one thing that I'm really curious about is you guys said that, there's like the second phase is going to start opening up in New York where you can start to show apartments again. Do you guys, this is you guys personally, do you guys feel safe doing that? I'm curious from, an agent's perspective, do you feel like that's something that you'll be comfortable with when that time starts to, come around?
Yeah, I'll jump on this. I have been in New York this entire time. I haven't left. I've left my apartment. I've had to go get groceries. Mm-hmm. I've had to be out and about. And I haven't gotten sick. I've taken precautions and I will continue to do so. So I am not nervous at all from my perspective. If I spent the last 3+ months in New York City and have left my apartment, and I have ridden the subway for certain reasons, and I haven't gotten sick, and I've been cautious about everything, I'm not concerned for myself. But even though I'm not concerned for myself, I'm still going to take all the precautions. I'm going to wear the mask all the time. Whenever I'm outside, I wear the mask. I have a dog. I walk the dog, put the mask on. It's shocking to see how many people aren't wearing masks around New York City, and that bothers me. Wow. Right? I wear a mask for other people. Just because I'm not concerned, I'm wearing it for other people. I don't want other people to be concerned around me.
Right. Yeah, I have not been in New York most of the time. So this is all kind of supposition. But our job, so if I were a broker anywhere else, if I were a broker in the suburbs or in another city where I had a car, I wouldn't be worried at all. Mm-hmm. And to be clear, when phase 2 opens, it doesn't mean we're having open houses anymore. It doesn't mean that we're showing groups of people. There are very clear guidelines out there, one person in a property at a time, or the listing agent plus the person, not even their agent necessarily.
Oh, okay.
So it's going to be very regulated. I'm not worried about that side of it at all. I'm most worried about once phase 2 opens up and everyone cramming on the subway. Really our only means of getting around the city is the subway or taxis. So that part I'm still kind of trying to wrap my head around, if I'm being fully honest. But in terms of getting into a building and actually showing it, I think we've all learned enough to properly distance and do it the right way. It's just getting to the properties. It's a unique proposition for New Yorkers.
I can totally imagine. So I recently gave up taking the subway in Berlin. And like March 7th or 10th, I stopped taking the subway and I actually forced myself how to learn to ride a bike. And it's been really, really crazy. So I have totally switched from being someone who took the subway everywhere to now riding a bike everywhere. And I think it was terrifying. And I don't know if I would recommend that for New Yorkers, but it was definitely a kind of a big moment for me of switching, mindset. Which leads
Funny,
me.
Sorry.
No, go ahead, Matt.
One of the biggest brokers is actually at Scott's company, or did he move? He's the bicycle broker, and he literally takes his client, Danny Davis. He takes his clients out on city bikes, and he goes everywhere on city bike. And this is just and literally he's one of the most successful brokers in the city. So it's possible.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Not for everyone, but possible.
Myself can do it, but we'll see. We'll figure it out when it happens.
So that actually starts to get me towards my second question, right? Which is, so now that we understand all these things that are changing and how real estate's been totally, flipped upside down in some ways in terms of how you guys approach your jobs, well, what are going to be some of the short-term, long-term consequences of that? Like, I'm curious, you said already, like, there's a 7 to 10% reduction in asking price. How long is that going to last? What are we seeing like 6 months out, a year out, 18 months out? Scott, do you want to start with this one and then we'll flip it over to Matt?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're not exactly sure what we're going to see, I believe. I think that right now we're going to have a window of opportunity, right? As soon as phase 2 opens, I'm telling all my sellers it's a window of opportunity. Typically in New York, the markets are the spring market and the fall market, right? And typically you put your property on either of those markets. Well, we missed our spring market. So what we're in for and what we believe we're in for is a delayed spring market, right? So we're going to have all these buyers that haven't been able to see property wanting to buy, and all these sellers that haven't been putting their properties on the market about to put their property on the market. Or we're going to have a set of sellers that are holding it back for the fall, which I believe is a mistake, because we're in a window of opportunity where the summer market's not going to be the traditional summer market. It's going to be the delayed spring market, right? So if you're a seller and you're holding back your property to the fall, you're missing out, all right? We're going to have a whole bunch of serious buyers during the summer market that are out there that need to buy, particularly to be in a place for the fall. So I think that coupled with everything that's going on with COVID, we're going to see a little bit of a price drop, but it really depends on demand. It depends on what the buyers, I think it's not going to be as big as people think. People are throwing around numbers like 30%. We're not going to see a 30% dip. We've seen a lot of new development already drop pricing. We had a huge surge leading up to COVID. And if COVID didn't happen, we would have had a really stellar year. But I think prices adjusted a lot before the shutdown. And so to say that they're going to adjust another 30% is it's too much of a price drop.
Yeah, I think you just said that perfectly. I mean, literally from 2016 till just before COVID, we saw prices drop anywhere from 10 to 20% around the city. So that's why we really saw such a huge uptick in activity in Q1 before this all hit. So there's a group of people who thinks those buyers, the serious buyers who were looking in Q1 are still going to be around. And once the market opens, they're going to jump. So to Scott's point, there is going to be this window of opportunity, I think, for sellers. And especially because these buyers have been mulling over their wish list over the last 3 months. They've really been refining it as they've been locked in their apartments. And they know they want that balcony, or they know they want that home office because they're going to be working from home now. So you have this pool of buyers who's going to be very serious and very ready to go. And they're going to jump on anything they can find as soon as that market opens. I was on a call with an appraiser last week, a big appraiser in New York City, and he was talking about how they're appraising properties right now because obviously there's no comps. And he said he's seen that the expectation from a lot of buyers is for 20 to 30, as Scott was saying, 20 to 30% price reductions. But the reality is the way they're appraising properties, at least, is they're essentially taking pre-COVID prices.
Mm-hmm.
So looking at comps from November through January or so, November through February. And then if it's your run-of-the-mill, nothing special, you know, not a floor through brownstone in the West Village, but just your normal everyday apartment, they're typically taking about a 10% reduction.
Okay.
And then they're adjusting either up or down from there based on the features of the apartment. So the reality of the market, and this is as important for sellers as it is for buyers, is not this doomsday 20, 30%. It's closer, as I was saying before, 7 to 10%.
Yeah, and I also think that that's not the spectrum of the market, right? I think the sub 2 million market and the sub 1 million market won't be affected as much as the above 2 million market, right? The luxury market is going to get hit harder as it always does, than the sub 2 million market.
Yeah, especially now that the stock market has started to rebound some. You know, people lost 20% of their net wealth, and now it's maybe 5%.
Exactly.
You know, that's so interesting. Because you guys just mentioned this idea of people taking some time to really, really refine their wish list, do you think in some ways that's going to make your jobs a little bit easier coming out of this craziness, or make it just much more crazy, much more running?
I'll talk to this point. So whenever I'll start. So whenever a buyer is very specific of what they want, it's twofold. It makes the job easier because you know what not to bring them.
Right.
If they're really gung-ho about that and really sticking to their guns, but it also may take longer. For example, I got into contract with a buyer in February, right before COVID, and I had been working with them for 2.5 years. So much so that they were no longer a buyer. And an apartment came to market. It was emailed me to another broker. We blast them out. We don't think it ever works. This worked because it got into my inbox. I saw it. I called up my buyer. We saw it the next day. We put in an all cash offer that day, and we were in contract within a week, right? And they were no longer a buyer, right? And that was 2.5 years of working with them, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to have people that are very, very, very specific. We're going to have two groups of people that, and I already have these two groups of people that are very specific of what they want, and they find it, they'll buy it. And then people who are like, hey, I think there's going to be an opportunity here.
Right.
This is what I'm looking for. If it's out there at a good price, I'll buy it. Right. So we have those two groups of people, at least those two groups of people.
Yeah. And I think actually on the buy side, I mean, yeah, it's going to be exactly what Scott was saying, and we're going to be running around to the extent we can, because really with buyers, as I was saying, at least the guidance that's out right now, we're not going to be allowed into the properties with our buyers. It's going to be the listing agent and the buyer. So it's questionable how much running around we're actually going to be doing versus kind of sending them out and asking them to video chat with us and we can talk through things. On the sales side, I think I was actually having this conversation with another broker the other day, because he was like, what are we doing with commissions right now? Because it's such a different world. And obviously we can't talk about what the percentages are, but I said, if anything, I think we can actually justify our commissions even more right now, because back in the day, you listed something. I mean, we did a lot of very important things, and our time is very valuable, obviously, but you listed something, you could have an open house, you got 20 people in,
right,
and you could garner a buyer from that. That world's gone now. We're gonna have to field every single phone call, not only field the phone calls, but also pre-vet everybody, pre-screen everybody, probably see financials, at least understand a lot more about the person before arranging a time for them to get in. So it's gonna be a lot more research on the front end than ever before, just to get people in, which is gonna narrow down our pool. We're not gonna have as many people coming in to see places. So I think on the sales side, it's gonna make our jobs better in a lot of ways, because we're going to get much more qualified people in. We're not going to be wasting our time with people who are just looky-loos, but also a lot harder because there's a lot more work on the front end.
You know, exactly. Again, just like totally segues into my last question that I often ask, right?
It's like we planned this.
I know, it's like we orchestrated that. Is, you know, well, where do we go from here, right? Like, you know, you guys have been in this industry for a a hot minute and you have a strong understanding of what's going on the sell side, buy side. I'm really curious to get your guys's perspective. I know the long run is still unclear, but if you were to give some advice to either buyers, sellers, other brokers at the moment, I'm curious what's on your mind. Like, what do you think is going to be the way that we start to find our way out of the current situation? And do you think that we'll find a new normal, so to speak, when it comes to real estate?
Yeah, I mean, look, humans are resilient and we have a short-term memory. So I think we're definitely going to settle into the new normal and figure out the best way to move forward. I think there's definitely some good things that have come out of this. We talked about this briefly before offline, but the New York buying process is very antiquated in a lot of ways. There's a lot of paper, there's a lot of people in a room, there's all the things that are not good in the COVID environment. So a lot of those things have been forced to change. Not only have the showings turned virtual, but a lot of the closing processes have turned virtual. And things like board packages, where literally if I showed you pictures of what a board package used to look like, it was thousands of printed pages this tall that you had to mail in. I mean, it was just like a mind-bogglingly antiquated process. All those have moved online. The board interviews have become Zoom interviews. There's just things that make a lot more sense that we should have been doing anyways, that I'm very, very hopeful stick around in the new normal. In terms of what we recommend to buyers and sellers, I think we've kind of addressed that already. I think on the sales side, we have that window of opportunity where you're really going to get a bunch of people jumping. On the buy side,
right.
That's a little harder for me to say whether you should definitely jump right now or if you should wait a little bit. There's one argument that says if you jump right now, there's going to be a lot of inventory, probably, as long as the sellers are listening. If you wait, maybe you're going to kind of get past that feeding frenzy and have a bit more breathing room to find exactly what you want.
Yeah. I mean, you said earlier, Imran, that you call the consequences, right? I see it as opportunities, right? Mm-hmm. So I had 2 closings in the past week and a half. One, and they're obviously both virtual. One took 3 days and the other one took 12 hours. So none of them ideal. And I was talking to the attorney on the one where it took 12 hours. And I said, when we were talking, it started at 10:30 a.m. I called her at 4 p.m. I said, how are we looking? And she said, well, we're getting there, but it's taking a while. I was like, so virtual closings are not the wave of the future? And she laughed and she said, it's so funny because I just wrote a whole article for the board association about how virtual closings are the wave of the future. Uh-huh. And she said she still believes that's the case. It just needs to be tweaked a bit. Yeah. With any new process, it does, right? Yeah. Essentially, I mean, the way it works right now, the attorney had power of attorney for the client, and a closer from the title company actually went to her house with documents for her to sign. Yeah, both the closings happened that way. And so the hiccup was that they needed to scan things and do things that essentially someone needs to be in the office for. So that there's going to be someone has to be in an office with access to equipment. But I definitely see virtual closings being the way it is going forward somewhat, right? I think our commissions were received via wire, which I think that's going to stay. I don't think we're going to deal with checks as much anymore. Mm-hmm. And in terms of buyers, I think that there will be pockets of opportunity for buyers in this situation. There are going to be people that, I mean, I have a client right now where they aren't even using the apartment. They're out of the city. They've been trying to sell it. We decreased the price a couple of times because of it. Buyer swoops in the next couple months, even now, like they'll get a great deal. People who need to sell will sell and will sell at a great price. So, if buyers are in close contact with their agent, in close contact with the market, and when the market officially does open back up, they'll be able to realize what's a great deal and be able to pounce on it.
Absolutely.
It's so interesting because, I know we're wrapping up now, and thank you guys so much for joining me. But one thing that I wanted to point out, I interviewed a guy who's a wedding planner. He's like one of the top wedding planners in the world. And he said to me, like, look, people are still going to get married, right? And I think it's the same thing about people buying places or moving, right? People are still going to do that. We'll just find a new way of doing that, right? The new methodology, the new processes for getting to that point. Well, thank you guys so much. This was really interesting, very fascinating for me in particular, and really appreciate all of your insights. So thanks again for joining me, guys.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Bye, guys.